North Korea marks the 85th anniversary of the Korean People's Army today with a central report meeting in the capital, Pyongyang. Addressing the meeting, General Pak Yong-sik, Minister of the People's Armed Forces, says the country's, quote, methods of nuclear attack, which are aimed at the Asia-Pacific and the U.S., are ready for launch at any time. North Korea often marks significant dates by displaying its military capability, and South Korea and its allies have been bracing for the possibility of another nuclear test or a launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile. The reclusive country has so far carried out 5 nuclear tests.
Well, let's talk about North Korea now. Joining us on the line from Washington is political analyst Sean King. He's a senior vice president at Park Strategies focused on Asia. Good morning and thanks for being with us today, Sean. Of course, a lot of tensions running high today. North Korea said the other day that it could sink the USS Carl Vinson, which is nearing the Korean Peninsula right now. Now, the likelihood of it doing so, though, is very low. So what's the end game to all of these threats?
I'm glad you realize that the likelihood is very low, because North Korea shoots its mouth off and rattles its saber a lot, but often doesn't follow through on its threats. If so, we would have had World War III a long time ago. But its nuke program and North Korea's aggressive posture, as it were, serves 2 purposes. And the first, it wants to preserve the regime. North Korea is not ISIS. They don't want to die. They want to live. And they see the nukes as protecting them against any external, i.e. American, attempt at regime change. And still, the government in North Korea, which is an ultra-nationalist, pro-Korean government, still sees itself as the rightful government for the entire peninsula. And what it wants is, it wants U.S. troops out of the South. And it feels that by holding a nuclear gun to our head, it'll force us into bilateral negotiations with Pyongyang, thereby cutting out South Korea, forcing us into some kind of, or compelling us into some kind of peace treaty with the North, precondition for which would be taking our troops out of the South and then leaving the South open for a second North Korean invasion as we saw in 1950. I know that sounds a little far-fetched, but they did it once before. If they had their druthers, they'd likely do it again. But at the very least, the nukes are there to prevent us from trying to overthrow the Kim regime.
Well, Sean, we've seen the efforts for diplomatic talks in the past. There was talk of a peace treaty in the past as well, possible reunification of the Korean Peninsula. But as we've seen with talks, North Korea fails to hold up their end of the bargain. They tend to go ahead and pursue their nuclear arsenal. So what would compel the U.S. to actually agree to come to the table for diplomatic talks if they haven't shown any willingness to do so in the past?
Well, I can't speak for the U.S. government. The problem with democracy is you have different governments with different agendas. And the peace treaty talks are bunk, and North Korea often does not live up to its end of the bargain. I would think that North Korean recognition of South Korea as a legitimate co-state might be enough to get us back to the table. But until that, I mean, how can we negotiate one-on-one with North Korea when they won't even recognize our own ally in the South, whom they once attacked? It would have been like us entering into talks with East Germany before East and West Germany recognized each other in 1972. I think the real move next would be secondary sanctions. Most of the North Korean entities that are sanctioned by the UN have moved into China and are operating from there under Chinese names through Chinese banks. We need to go after the Chinese entities and the Chinese banks that are acting as hard currency conduits for the North Korean weapons program. Only then will the North Korean regime get serious.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned those secondary sanctions. What is keeping the Trump administration from actually pulling the trigger on those? Because he's been threatening to do that for a while now.
I know. I wish he would. I was hoping that that's what would happen in Mar-a-Lago, but I think Xi Jinping told him just enough to give China some more time to see if they could do something on their own. But again, this is the classic Chinese proverb of same bed, different dreams. We want North Korea to go away so we can have a peaceful, united, democratic Korea run by a regime like that in the South. Beijing wants to keep the Korean Peninsula divided because they know a unified Korea means a U.S. ally on its border without getting anything in return. So Beijing just wants to manage a chronic situation, but they're actually quite happy with the status quo because they know the nukes aren't aimed at them. So I think what's going to happen is Trump is going to realize that Xi really can't deliver. He's not going to change the situation, and hopefully then he goes for secondary sanctions. But I really think that's the only logical next step here.
Well, you know, President Trump is meeting with the UN Security Council. He did hold talks with President Xi as well as Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe on the phone the other day. What is he trying to achieve with all of this talk?
I don't know. Maybe he's trying to get someone to blink. You know, both sides are talking tough, and maybe we'll both stand down. But I don't want anybody to get too crazy here. I don't think there's going to be any war breaking out anytime soon. Even without the nukes, the conventional force that North Korea has, and we would win any war against North Korea, but the fact is that hundreds of thousands of South Koreans would die in the process. Only 30 miles from the DMZ, you have 20 million people in Metro Seoul. So those deaths would be on our head if we started any kind of conflict. And when Abe is saying he supports Trump, of course he has to say that because the U.S. is Japan's security lifeline, and their abductions by North Korea are still unresolved. So Abe wants to show that he's strong with Trump, but by no means is Japan looking for war either. I think that Trump is talking tough, so North Korea really thinks twice about what it's going to do and tries to ratchet down its nuke program. But I don't think they're going to do that because North Korea needs to be at a constant near state of war with us to justify their own hold on their own people. So I really think secondary sanctions are the most likely next step.
Well, what about this detention of the American professor over the weekend? Could we see a situation where they hold our citizens hostage or American citizens hostage?
They are. I mean, look at what happened in Malaysia at KLI airport in the Kim Jong-nam killing. Basically, the way that North Korea got its diplomats out who were accused of committing the murder was to hold Malaysian diplomats hostage in Pyongyang. And look at the abduction scenario with Japan. They're expert in holding people hostage for what they want. That's exactly what they're doing with the 2 Americans that are already there and the new one captured. This is just another reason. Please do not visit North Korea, because for any reason at all, they can detain you, and then that compromises U.S. negotiating strength on other bigger issues. And also, by going there, you're spending hard currency, you're giving an evil regime more money and more fortification to stay in power. So I beg my fellow Americans, please do not visit North Korea.
All right. Well,